Impact Interview is sponsored by the Pocono Mountains, where small town charm meets big adventures. Book your trip today by visiting PoconoMountains.com.
Welcome back to Nittany Game Week. This week's guest really doesn't need an introduction in the college football world, but I would like to add he's a Western Pennsylvania native. He played at Nebraska. His coaching career took him to stops at Iowa and Notre Dame before cementing his legacy as the godfather of Wisconsin football. It's Hall of Famer Barry Alvarez. Coach, thanks so much for joining us. We always appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Always fun to be with you guys.
Okay, so we got some good stuff for you, but if you haven't noticed, there's been a few changes in college football in recent years. This is our Impact Interview, so I'd like to start there with the kind of the rapid and radical changes that have happened in the last couple of years. What are your thoughts on the changes and maybe the ones that have impacted the game the most?
Well, probably the biggest one, I've always been in favor of doing whatever you can for the players. But when basically you're paying players now, it never was supposed to reach the recruitment of players, but that's exactly where it's gone, and you knew that's where it would go. That bothers me, and I think it changes the game, and I think that's the root of the issues that we have right now.
Wisconsin started out 2-2, but they've really seemed the last week, through 3 weeks, to find their foundation on offense with a veteran offensive lineman. The play of the quarterback's really gotten better. The running game has gotten better. How much do you think that's a factor, and can that really carry over against a really good Penn State defense this week?
Yeah, they've improved, and that's what you always look for. They lost some very good teams. That Alabama team's a nice team. But I think they're playing very well right now. As you mentioned, Camp Randall's a tough place to play at night. I think it'll be a good football game.
First off, I got to tell you, everybody at Burgettstown, we've increased our viewership. I told them we were having you on the show, so I know we're going to take over Burgettstown for sure. But hey, here's my question for you. The combination of that tough Wisconsin defense, and it's a night game at Camp Randall, which could cause a lot of big challenges for a road team in Madison. How big a factor can that be this week?
It can be a huge factor. I was just listening to an interview the other day after a game where coaches and players were talking about how the crowd noise affected, as you know, you want to change plays, any communication that an offense has, it can really be affected. And so, you want to take advantage of anything you have. And when you're playing at home at our place, I'm sure, our fans will be into the game. It's a big game against a great team, a team with a tremendous reputation. And so it should be a factor.
Note to Penn Staters, one of the biggest compliments you mentioned that you received came from Joe Paterno. And I was wondering if you could share that story with the Penn Staters and the Nittany Lions fans on our show.
I'm trying to think what it was. Well, first of all, Joe and I had he was good to me as a young head coach, even when I was an assistant coach. He always treated me right. And when he came into the league, I kind of took him under my arm and try to help him a little bit and give him some suggestions and help him through the league. He was a very important person to me and someone that I really respected.
Barry, your grandson, Jake Ferguson, has had a great start to his career as a tight end in Dallas. Penn State has a big-time tight end in Tyler Warren this year. It seems in the last couple of years that position has really elevated in importance in the pro game and the college game. Now, being a defensive, a guy who really prided himself on great defense, what kind of matchup problems are those guys now presenting for people scheming defensively against guys like that?
Yeah, well, the position's an important position because it's a factor in both phases. You need a good tight end to have a good running game. Who do you match them up with in the throwing game? You put a strong safety. A linebacker can't run with them in most cases. Strong safety probably isn't big enough Jake and your guy, they're both 6'5", 6'6". They're hard to match up with in the passing game.
What Joe and you used to talk about all the time was how fat and slow you were. That's why he didn't recruit you.
Oh, hear that? That's my wife wanted to remind me, but that's what Joe used to say. The reason he didn't recruit me because I had a fat ass and I was too slow.
You know what? That is now the greatest moment in the history of this show, by far.
And no wonder you would want to forget that.
I didn't forget it.
Hey, Coach. Hey, being a Western Pennsylvania guy who built tough Big Ten teams, what are your thoughts on the Big Ten adding those 4 West Coast teams to the conference?
You know what? Quite frankly, I like it. I think it'd be fun. It'd be a pain for guys traveling, particularly East Coast, going all the way out there to play. But still, I always looked at the experience for the players. For a player, that grew up, let's say, in Western Pennsylvania, the next thing you're out there in L.A. You're playing at the Rose Bowl. You're playing UCLA at the Rose Bowl, or and that type thing. I think that's a great experience. And so, that's the way college football has gone. I think, when things like that happen, I look for the positive things in it. And that's one of the positives that I see.
I'm friends with some Wisconsin alums that were there in the early 90s. So they're a little bit older than my vintage. They talk a lot about the respect they have for you and how you came in and really reestablished Wisconsin. What were some of the key factors? Because your impact on it was far beyond the football field and that university. What were some of the key factors when you first got there that you had to overcome, and things that were advantages that really helped you build that program to where it really is one of the elite programs in the Big Ten?
Yeah, well, when I came, they had not had a winning season in a while. They'd been to 4 or 5 bowl games in the history of the school. I think the 62 Rose Bowl was the last major bowl game that they had been to. I think they won 1 minor bowl game, and they just weren't used to winning. And they still had, and the fans, all of a sudden, I can remember playing here in the 80s when Dave McClain was here, and they were a 7 and 8 win team. But the place was packed. The crowd was, the raucous. They loved their football here. And all of a sudden, they'd gone so many years without winning. The stadium had thinned out. There was a lack of interest. And, as much as they like their football, they can go watch the Packers play. And so, we had to get the interest back in football. We had to win over the best players in the state were leaving the state. And that was the first thing that I had to address. Keep your best players at home. We don't have as many players. On a normal year in Wisconsin, you're lucky to have 6 or 7 Division I players. And you better get those guys. Unlike Pennsylvania, where you've got a number of really good players and a lot of schools coming in there. There's enough guys for everyone, but that's not the case here. So I had to win over the high school coaches first, and then have them really help me with the players. And then I said when I took the job, I want to build a wall around the state, keep the best players here. And, for the most part, I think in those 16 years I was here, probably didn't lose more than a handful of players.
Coach, I'm headed to Madison. A lot of Penn State fans are coming your way. Last thing I'll ask you is any recommendations? Where should they go? Where should they stop? You got a favorite place or a friend that owns a joint that you want them to stop in at?
Well, I happen to be an investor in Ruth Chris.
Uh-huh.
So
There you go.
I would
Farmers Market.
yeah, and my wife said go to Farmers Market Saturday morning downtown around the square. It'd be fun, particularly for the women that are coming to town. But Rare is a good place downtown. Another good steakhouse right down on the square. So a lot of good places to eat in town.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, it's a night game, so we'll have that opportunity. Does your wife want to say hello? She want to get in the picture? She's kind of stolen the show a little bit here.
She normally has plenty to say. She's retired now, she says.